We are the
Carwells.
Carwells.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Sarah. Welcome
to the Superhost Labs podcast.
Okay, so every episode we like to kick it off with an Airbnb horror story. So today, before we get into the horror story, I want to take a minute to introduce our guests, Frank and Xanthi. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us. To give our listeners a hair of a backstory, when my husband and I were in Tulum about a month ago, we connected with Frank and Xanthi, who have an Airbnb in Tulum. They are hosts there. And so we connected through social media, as we do with 99.9% of the people that we bring on here. And we got brunch and we had a debaucherous afternoon of mezcal, and the rest is history. So today we are interviewing them and we're going to pick their brain about what it's like to Airbnb in Tulum. But as always, we start with an Airbnb horror story. So before we dig into all of that, why don't you guys kick us off with your Airbnb horror story?
Okay.
It's a good one.
So it's so interesting actually that we like own an Airbnb, because as we get into the conversation, there's like so many little like things that happened in our life and a relationship before that felt like it was like leading up to this. But one of those things is that when we got married, which was several years ago, we got married in Pittsburgh, and we had decided that we were going to just elope. Like we took my best friend and her husband down, and we were going to stay at an Airbnb, and we were going to get married across the street at a restaurant. We actually ended up pivoting and deciding to get married at the Airbnb because the backyard was really cute. But before that happened, we drove to Pittsburgh, we checked in, all good. And we're going through the house, and it was like a 3-bed, I believe. And we were going through the house and everything was beautiful. One of the bedrooms opened, the door was open, it was fine. The upstairs bedroom, fine. But there was another bedroom that was locked. And it's not unusual for maybe like a master to be locked or something like that. And we spent some time in the house. We like had a drink. We're not the ones to like get there and just like read the guidebook right away. You know what I mean? Like, we understand it's a house. Now that we have an Airbnb, we're a bit more aware of how important that is. But at the time we were like, whatever, we'll just chill. We know Pittsburgh well, we've been there many times. So we were just like, oh, we'll just settle in, whatever. So eventually, after being there for quite some time, I can't even remember if it was the day that we arrived or if it was the day after. But I kind of think it was the day after, because I think our friends had arrived the day after us. So they were with us when we found this information. And so we're looking through the guide of like what to do, you know, in the area, that kind of thing. And as a part of this guide, they mention that the reason why that upstairs door is locked is because they've left their cat there. And the cat is there with us. They were like, he's fine. He has as much food and water as he needs. If he cries, don't let him out. But don't worry, he's up there. And so it was like one of those things where we were like, should we tell somebody, or is this just like okay? And so we decided to like abide by the guest wishes and not say anything to anybody about it, and we just let it happen. But we were there for like 3 days with the cat and never heard the cat. Well, we may have like tried to like listen to make sure it was still alive, but yeah, really strange. Yeah. And it was like very funny because I feel like we kind of erase that from our memory, and I just recently remembered like a couple of weeks ago that happened, and I was like, whoa, remember when we got married and there's a cat locked upstairs in one of the rooms? But as far as I know, cat's all good. Cat was fine. Cat was making a lot of noises the whole time, didn't seem in distress at all. And I know that cat owners often feel that their cats can be left alone for days, you know, when with food and water, and they're pretty self-sufficient. So I wasn't overly concerned, but it was definitely very strange and just one of those things totally not expecting to experience.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like what happens if they get like a week-long booking? Like what's
that was what we said. Yeah.
I wonder if it was because it was just a weekend, maybe that's why. I don't know. I've seen listings where people are like, if you come to stay at my Airbnb, like my cat will be here and you have to hang out with it, like out in the house, which is fine, like sure. But this was
not as a prisoner.
This was next level. Yeah. This was next. The don't let him out was one of them where I was like, oh no.
What kind of cat are we dealing with here?
Maybe it's one of those mean cats. Maybe it was because like my cats are nice. I could like leave my cats out with people and they would be fine, but some cats are mean.
Maybe it's actually where like Grumpy Cat hangs out. It's like his hideout.
Just he's having a good time. So
to make you feel a little better, I have left my cats by themselves for 4 days with food, water, and a litter box, and they are totally fine. So I'm sure the cat was great.
Yeah, totally. Good to know. You actually
I've
remind
never
me
had
of
an
that
indoor
story,
cat.
too. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, he must be an indoor cat, or maybe
Yeah.
he's like not supposed to be indoor, outdoor, whatever. But yeah, I remembered another Airbnb horror story that we had too, where it was like one of those things where it's not a long story. I won't get too deep into it, but like when we like all the photos looked lovely, but when you arrived, like every single thing you opened was packed to the brim of stuff, like medicine cabinet packed, like things falling out at you, under the bed packed, like literally as if it was in a packing cube, but it was like the bed. It was like very alarming. So it's given us a lot to think about in building out our own space and like what to avoid, which I mean seems kind of obvious, but
I've like blocked
never
that
know.
hoardered in completely from my memory.
Bad memories. We
I forgot
tend to
about that.
ignore. We tend to ignore. Anyways. there you
That's
have
so true though. I mean, we have so many conversations with people who are like, want our advice on how to get involved in Airbnb. And a lot of times we'll suggest that they start with their own home, and we'll be like, look, like as long as you're not a pack rat. And I'm kind of going through that process with my parents right now, where we've like assessed how much their property could make on AirDNA, and we're like, oh my gosh. And my parents now are snowbirds, so they travel 6 months out of the year. And so now we've started this process, like literally the room that I'm sitting in behind me, you can like see the corner of the boxes over here is like a situation of me decluttering like the pack to the brim closet so that our guests don't have to experience that. But I'm just like, there's so much to do before you could make it even guest ready, because everything is so full. And that's just like, it's America for one. People just like their stuff.
Yeah. I stayed in I was just in the UK with my husband last month, and we stayed in a Airbnb in London that somebody lived in, that was their flat. And she literally, like, we had one cabinet that we were allowed to get into, one piece of the closet, and she just put tape over everything that we were not allowed to get into.
Perfect.
So like she just taped the doors closed, and then if we were allowed to get into it, it had a green ribbon on it. And I was like, that's a pretty organized way of going about it, I guess.
So funny. I love it.
That's wild.
People are crafty. Very crafty.
Oh my gosh. It's like, sorry guys, this is like the ratchet period of us figuring out how to Airbnb before we're like standardized. Stressful. Well, we have some questions for you today, but before we kind of dig into those questions, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourselves to our guests and just give them a little bit of background on who you guys are.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So we're the Appleyards. I'm Xanthi. This is Frank is also here. We are a married couple. We also own our business together. Our business is O Sierra, which is sort of an umbrella brand, which includes like lifestyle, hospitality, agency, and a community as well. And we've been running this business together since late 2017. And it's taken lots of shapes since then, as is our relationship and our living situation. We're originally from Canada, Hamilton, Ontario. And in 2020, we moved down to Mexico to set up our Airbnb down there. And since then, we've been sort of traveling, living nomadically. And yeah, from here, the world is our oyster, basically. We're very much like, we live in pursuit of possibility, of opportunity. So we really sort of lean into things and experiences that feel awesome. And it's taken us to a lot of really exciting places so far.
Yeah, I'd say so. And your Airbnb journey is extremely unique in a lot of ways. So I'm excited to kind of dig into that on this episode. But as it goes, I am the talker in the situation. Emily is always trying to talk over me. So I always like to give the mic over to her as much as I possibly can, or otherwise I'll carry on. So Emily, I'll let you kick off the questions.
Yeah. So you mentioned O Sierra and then how it's kind of an umbrella. So can you kind of give us a rundown of like the timeline of O Sierra and then Sierra Swim Club and like the difference between everything that you guys have?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm also the talker. So Frank, feel free to share.
So O Sierra was the like creative business that we started back at the end of 2017 when we were in a hotel room in Boston, trying to decide what we wanted to do with our lives that didn't involve working for someone else. So this was basically like, Xanthi was doing some freelance stuff. I was working in communications, and we were like, hey, we could probably do our own thing. And just that night, like just before midnight on New Year's Eve, a couple bottles of wine in, sure, let's register a business. Let's do it. Since then, it's taken like so many forms, beginning with like working locally with clients and a lot of people that Santhi already knew, and like being sort of creative people in Hamilton doing whatever. You need writing, you need photos, you need a website. Sure, we got you.
Yeah.
And over the years, it's grown a little bit. I think like 2019 sort of marked a big shift into.
Yeah, I mean, I would say at that point we really honed in on what our ideal kind of working world looks like. And so now today we specialize in messaging and marketing strategy specifically through the agency. Then we also do content creation and brand partnership, a lot of social media collaboration in many different ways. And we've also built our own creative community. So that's like an educational and empowerment kind of space for entrepreneurs who are looking to run remote businesses, need support when it comes to messaging and marketing, communicating, whether that's with their own communities or in a more kind of public media-based forum. And so that sort of Osiera brand is the umbrella to everything. And the Osiera Swim Club is our property. And so that's our property in Tulum, which we purchased in 2020. We bought the property we actually technically bought it in July of 2020. And then we moved down there October of 2020 to renovate. So when we moved down there, we ended up staying there for about 8 months consecutively, living there because when we bought it, it needed kind of a full redo. And so the Airbnb listing went live May 2021 and our first rentals were July 2021. So we had about a little under a year between actually purchasing the property and getting it fully kind of flipped and ready to go, which was an exciting adventure all in all.
I can only imagine.
Gosh,
I mean,
yeah.
just being in Tulum, I'm like, Tulum has its own like kind of magical chaos as is, but when it comes to like trying to build there or keep organized, or I'm sure there was a language barrier, like all of those things give me anxiety when I think about investing outside of the US. And you guys are going in with no experience, right? You guys are like, okay, we're going to do this Airbnb thing. We're also going to do it in a country that's not our home country. And let's just like rip this off like a Band-Aid. And so many elements of what you guys did is like I think we're crazy, right? And then I like listen to your story and I'm like, oh, what? How?
Totally.
Yeah,
We're definitely like a leap before you look type people. Like when we had the opportunity to purchase the property, we just went 100% let's go and figure it out after. And it wasn't until like a week before we were leaving that we were like, was this a horrible mistake? But it was too late. So we just went for it. It was not a horrible mistake. No. It was a great choice. But definitely the there's not a ton of like overthinking that went into it, let's just say.
Yeah, that's exactly why I keep Emily around, because I function in that same realm and that's just gotten me into trouble more times than it hasn't.
My gosh, Emily's... yeah, that gives me anxiety just thinking about making a decision like that so last minute. But that's also why like I take so much longer to make decisions and sometimes I don't make them. And that's why I have Sarah, because she'll make them for me.
Yeah.
She's like, no, we need to do it. We need to do it. And I'm like,
yeah, I'm the one that's like, let me present the idea, please poke holes in it. Like I know there's things I'm not seeing. So when you guys were considering starting an Airbnb and considering moving to Mexico, did the Airbnb idea come first or did the I want to live in Mexico idea come first?
That's a very interesting question. And I think it's different depending on who you ask, probably. Like we definitely, I mean, Frank, you could maybe share a bit of your feelings about moving to the Caribbean in general.
Yeah.
I feel like that was something that was really connected for you, but.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Rum Diary by Hunter S. Thompson, but it's basically like an American journalist who picks up and goes down to Puerto Rico and just like moves his life down there. It's one of my favorite books. I've always loved it. I've loved this idea of like, just pick up, just go, you can do the thing. And I've always had that little like fondness of like, yeah, I want to do that. Like when I had just graduated from university, I had the chance to go be like the editor of a paper in St. Kitts, and I foolishly said no to it and totally regretted it. So it was like, okay, here's another chance. We can go do this. So I love the idea of living in the Caribbean and just seeing palm trees and not having to shovel snow and all of those lovely things. So that sort of like fueled my emotional side of like, yeah, I want to do this. I don't want to wait until I'm 65 and buy like a retirement property in Mexico. I want it now.
Yeah. Actually, cute story. The first book that Frank ever like lent me to read when we were first dating was that book. So it's obviously something that's really important. But on my end, it was more so the sort of community piece. I didn't travel a lot when I was young. And so when me and Frank got together and started our business, we started traveling a lot, and we realized we could work, you know, pretty well remotely. We didn't have to be physically in the same spaces as our clients because of the type of work we were doing. So we just sort of took that opportunity. And it was during that year, kind of leading up to the pandemic, that we traveled the most, and we were kind of bopping around a lot. And so we started visioning this idea of like, well, what if every time we traveled, we didn't feel like we had to figure out where we were going to stay, and we didn't have to feel like we were starting over every single time. So we started visioning this idea for having sort of hubs of community and creativity, so that they were potentially equipped to be a great place to work, a great place to create. We do a lot of photography, as I mentioned before, so like having a space that's specific and like sort of has all the things you need to do that. And also I love to cook. Like there's a lot of pieces of sort of like our life that requires you to feel grounded, but we didn't really want to be grounded. So we thought, okay, well, maybe we can ideate this. Maybe we can create these hubs, and maybe that's something that we could pursue. And so we sort of put voice to that in like around January 2020. I remember specifically, like I posted something about that idea. And then the pandemic hit, and we were like, well, we're never leaving again. And so just sort of for fun, we had some friends who had moved down to the like Tulum area-ish, Playa del Carmen, and they had just been like, oh, you should chat with our realtor, like just to see, you know, just to see. And we were like, sure, like nothing else going on. And so sure enough, we started receiving listings from the realtor with no intention to do anything, because we really didn't know what was happening in the world. We didn't feel like it was a good time to make a crazy decision. But then a property came up, and we were like, whoa, like we have to find a way to make this work, because we saw it and we realized compared to what else was out there, there wasn't going to be an opportunity like this for us to kind of transform a space to be exactly what we were looking for. And so at that point we realized, you know, okay, let's do this. And at that point, once we were purchasing it, we were like, okay, well, this will be an Airbnb property. We also can move down and live there while we renovate it, see what we think. Maybe we stay, maybe we don't. But the hilarious thing is we didn't even own a property at all. Like we never owned a property together except for this one. And so it wasn't like, yeah, it was just one of those things where it wasn't like necessarily the most like logical, natural decision, but at the same time, it was like, there's no other way. We have to go and we have to kind of run with this. So does that answer the question?
Yes.
Yes, a million times yes. But I think what's most interesting too about kind of a common thread that we see with a lot of people that we bring on that are hosts is the fact that, you know, it stems from a love of travel first, and kind of this original idea of having many places that you can kind of hunker down and have this hub of your own, but also like have it monetized while you're not there. And so it's interesting to like watch how everyone starts with this core idea, and then it like spreads into something like totally different along the way. But it seems like the same type of person is the person who starts as an Airbnb host, as this like large idea that they're going to have a million properties everywhere in all their favorite places.
So we weren't unique in that.
Oh, I thought it was just but I mean, it's true. It makes sense in that way, I think, because as we kind of enter a society where people feel a lot more freedom and they feel that ability to move around, we also realize that there's a reason why we settled down in the first place, and how can we kind of have both. And for us, it's not just that, but it's the community side of things, where we came from a very tight-knit community in Hamilton, where it's like, I lived there since I was, well, we both lived there since we were born. We have like, you know, my best friends are still my friends that I went to kindergarten with. And so to be able to kind of remove myself from that and end up being so alone somewhere was like, that was the piece where it was like, okay, how can we feel grounded in the way that allows us to connect with the local community, connect with, you know, business owners here, and sort of just build that foundation from like a relationship perspective as well. So that's kind of where things are slowly heading for us as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I've done a deep dive on stalking you guys over the last month. So I feel like that like shows through so well with what you guys have built with Osierra. It feels like, you know, in comparison to a lot of other hosts, there's a lot more intentionality with what you guys are doing versus others who are like true investors. You know, they're not brand builders, they're not community builders, they are investors. And so it brings what you guys are doing a little bit more magic.
Well, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Okay, I think it's Emily's question next.
Yes, it is. What are some of the challenges that you guys had starting your Airbnb in Mexico versus like if you start one in Canada? Because I'm sure like buying property in a foreign country is not the simplest process. And I'm sure some people would love to hear kind of how that went for you guys.
Yeah, there were a couple challenges. We didn't speak Spanish. Our Spanish is still not what you would consider like fluent by any means. But we kicked off this whole process, like we jumped in, we're like, we're gonna make this work, this is gonna be okay. And the language barrier is something that you think isn't a big problem right until it is. And this is like, we'd been there for a few weeks at this point and things were going well. Like our contractor is one of the most amazing people. Hector speaks incredible English, which really negated a lot of that problem. And I vividly recall we went to Home Depot one day in Playa del Carmen because we had to pick some stuff up. And we walk in there being like, we know how to order dinner. Like, we're fine. We got this. We know some Spanish. And we just wandered around the aisles of that store absolutely aimlessly because we had no clue what the words were for anything on the signs, and had to sort of like muddle our way through. We left like so discouraged by the end of it. So the language barrier is a huge thing. I mean, we've seen it through like the construction that we did, through the maintenance that we do, through those little things. I feel like that's one that was a big challenge from the start.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the same time though, what we had done when we had realized that we were moving there is we started studying Spanish. Like we started trying to learn Spanish. And so what Frank said was so correct. When we arrived there, we knew how to like do anything at the grocery store, anything at a restaurant, but you realize that you learn in such specific spaces, right? And so it wasn't until we kind of went out of a space that was not within the zone that we were interacting in every day, and we were like, oh yeah, we don't know shit. And which, you know, I think is great. Like it was a really good grounding exercise for us. And now that we've kind of gone through it, we always joke, it's like Frank knows how to speak like construction Spanish. Like he knows all the words for your house because that he communicates with all the people who work on the home now. So it was an amazing learning experience from that perspective. But even beyond the construction piece, like sourcing was really challenging. So sourcing fixtures, glassware, linens, Amazon Mexico doesn't have the same selection. So even some of the brands that we are familiar with and we've experienced and worked with before, it's just going to be a different kind of game. So we found that, you know, we relied a lot on like local builders, local furniture shops and that kind of thing, which is awesome, but it doesn't give you a lot of choice when it comes to price point and that kind of thing, right? So we definitely, and because the startup cost is high, which we could share a bit more about as well in terms of just like how you buy a property there, but basically you have to pay the full price of the property, right? It's not like you get a mortgage that you can then pay off. So we had to put quite a lot of capital in at first, and then, you know, to outfit and renovate it, we had to be a lot more thoughtful. So it took longer. Like that's why we were living there for 8 months rather than having everything done in 4, right? So that was a piece of it. And then there's also, you know,
there's also like the regulatory side of it, which is like you have to abide by a totally different country's tax laws and everything. For a while in Mexico, Airbnb was sort of like the wild, wild west, where everyone was just running an Airbnb, making money. The Mexican government was getting no tax revenue off of it. So they've since started cracking down, and you have to know like, okay, what are my obligations? How do I enroll for this? There's currently like, I think a 14-month wait to get your tax number in Mexico because there's so many people in line to get it. So it's little like hurdles like that you have to.
But we went legit early, so we don't have to wait.
We beat the rush,
which is great. Now everyone's realizing, oh, we got to do that. But I mean, all in all, you know, it was things we navigated, and it served as an amazing lesson that we now can share with other people. And I'm happy that we were able to like kind of get through to the other side. But there was a lot of times when we were like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Like, what have we done?
Turning it legal early would not be a move that I would end up making.
Yeah. Sarah would have skipped right over that.
Let me know that it is definitely the right move. If you're moving to Mexico, you definitely want to make sure that you are going about it the right way, because eventually, like anyone we've ever talked to who tries to kind of cheat the system, it's like eventually it catches up to you, and it's not a nice scene when it does. So
I've been there.
It's funny that you mentioned like construction Spanish. My husband and I were in Thailand for 6 months last year. We were supposed to be there for a full 3 years. So we started to try to learn Thai before we went. And we're going thinking that we know everything. Like basic phrases, right? And then we show up and everybody has like a little bit of a slang that they say, and nobody says it exactly the same.
Yeah.
And so when he was going to work and back, he was like teaching me how to say it actually, how they would say it, because I was like, I cannot understand anything at this point because I'm saying it in such a formal way and they're not. And so I think you're like, oh, I'll learn everything. And then it's completely different
Yeah,
when you actually get there.
100%. And once you're immersed in it, it comes so quickly and it's so much easier. But which I think is something I would also recommend to somebody who's thinking about moving there and is feeling nervous about that. It's like you're never going to learn as much than when you're there. So just go.
Yeah, absolutely. Thai is a really hard language to learn. I didn't learn as much as I really wanted to in the 6 months, but I learned a little.
Okay, next time.
No, my brain doesn't work in foreign languages. I had like 4 years of Spanish and no, there's just nothing. It just doesn't function in that way. But that's amazing. What about on the operations side? So like on a day-to-day, like with your cleaners and with your guests specifically, do you find that most of your guests are international travelers? Because I'm sure, I mean, travel in general comes with quite a bit of anxiety, but when you're traveling internationally, it comes with even more anxiety. So like when we checked into our place in Tulum that was right up the street from yours, our host like met us outside the door and she was like, here are your keys, like this is where you have to go. And I was like, wow, this is like definitely something I needed. Like, and
Yeah.
you guys aren't there, right? So it's all automated. So how does that communication happen? Is it difficult? Do you find that people have a lot of anxiety walking into your space, or what does that look like?
I feel like people have been the most chill when they've been checking in. We've had like no crazy concerns, no like long lists of questions. And I think a lot of that does have to do with like, we give so much information at the start and we are so open to like, here is everything that we've learned from moving down here and figuring out how to actually live in this place. Go enjoy. Like now you have access to our entire library of information.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we do automate like the welcome, like people get the information in advance, they know where to go. Like there's photos telling them like, this is where your key is, this is how to get into the place. We have not had any problems with it so far, knock on all the wood.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you also have like an amazing communication style with them the whole time leading up to it. Like we're very responsive. We have a lockbox. Like it's like nothing dramatic. And then our property managers also do live on site. So if they ever have any issues where they need support, like they're there. Sometimes they'll greet them. We used to not have a lockbox, so they used to greet them, but we kind of took that step out just because people were arriving at random times, and that's been really helpful. But we'll often help them like with airport like pickup and things like that. Like we offer kind of to support with everything from, you know, every step if we can, and people don't always take us up on it, but I think them knowing that we are there and that we have that knowledge is really helpful.
Yeah, 100%. I would imagine we leaned on our host big time while we were down there.
Oh yeah, we got a lot of that. Where do I go for this? Where can I find this fruit?
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah, people are very specific about their fruit.
Yeah, well, and it's like you go to grocery stores there and it's like one day the grocery store will have one thing and the next day you'll go back and it's not there anymore, and you're like,
or well, it may just have moved to a new place in the grocery store, which is something that we learned. Like you sort of learn like, oh, tomatoes, like they're in this section. No, not that week, sorry.
But that's the fun. It's the fun of it. It's like, why are we all gotta be so strict around here? I love it. But I also love it because it's like when you go to the markets, like if they don't have something, it's not in season.
Yeah.
And that's such a good feeling, you know, like you're only eating what's actually fresh and available.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was a whirlwind for me. I'm like eat zucchini and cauliflower and broccoli every single day. Like just,
oh yeah.
They're winter
so
vegetables.
And then I go and I'm like, I can't find a single zucchini anywhere, like nowhere. I went to every market. I'm like, okay, well, no zucchinis for the month. Got it.
Nope, that's right.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got another question for you. You've recently gotten your US visas. Congratulations. I know that was a big thing for you guys. Will you spend more time growing OCR in the States and expanding your Airbnb business here? Or what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah,
good question.
So exciting. So our US visa is attached to our sort of umbrella brand entity, and so 100% we're planning to move to the States in September, into LA, at which point we'll definitely be expanding like the agency side, making relationships there. We definitely have some ideas in mind for like brand partnerships and stuff like that. As far as the like short-term rental space goes, we're not we're very interested in opportunities to invest and stay involved in the STR space in like different ways throughout the US. But our vision for expanding like our personal kind of portfolio would be Mexico probably first. So we're pursuing some avenues to make that happen, and then sort of just staying open to opportunities that may arise in the States once we're there.
Interesting. How come you want to continue investing in Mexico versus the States?
We feel that we've learned so much from our experience that like what we're kind of doing and what we're in discussions with is connecting or kind of partnering with other people who are looking to move down to purchase property in Mexico, and being able to be a resource for them as well. So helping guide people through that, and then also having the, an investment kind of share in that property or something like that. But we just see and feel that we've learned so much that it would be, sad not to pass that on and to continue to expand in that sense. And we love it there too, and we would love to have the opportunity to stay in other cities there ourselves. And so we just plan to spend more time traveling Mexico and kind of see what areas really speak to us in that way. But we're not saying no to the US by any means. We're just seeing what comes.
I love that. And it sounds like it's kind of shifted your overall Airbnb strategy from maybe the get-go as well, where you're like, okay, maybe I want hubs everywhere I want to travel, and now you're like, everywhere I want to travel in Mexico.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that the whole concept is like seeking out opportunity and like kind of joint ventureship is like what we love is we love being involved in the setup of the property, the marketing of the property, building the relationships that go along with that property. Like, do we need to have 100% ownership of every single thing that we're involved in? No, like we would still absolutely feel like we have kind of created those hubs. And I think there's so many different ways to do that, even through like the community that we're building as well, potentially hosting like events, in different spaces, and even just partnering with other Airbnb brands. That's something that we definitely are looking into. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. I think you limit yourself sometimes when you feel like, oh, I have to be the one that owns this, otherwise it's not going to happen. So we're just staying open.
Yeah, I like that you're like becoming a space of education for people as well. That's super helpful. And I know we learned that a lot of people needed that, and we didn't think that a lot of people needed it, but they really do. So it's nice to like be able to offer that to people as well.
Yeah. And I'm sure you guys, as you went through this entire process of starting your first Airbnb in Mexico, there are so many new things that you have to learn. And so like, even for us, it's like every time you enter a new market, Airbnb is so hyper local. So even if you switch from Tulum to Playa, or Playa to Riviera Maya, or wherever else, that's going to come with its own challenges, let alone jumping into a new country. So I hear you there. It's one of those things where at first I was like, okay, I'm going to have one property in every single location that I love. And now I'm like, I think I'd rather have a bunch of properties in one location that I'm familiar with, get them up and going quickly, become an expert in that space, and then travel everywhere that I want to go because the money's rolling in from it. So
absolutely.
So smart. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's so true. You kind of have to be in it to really understand how it's going to happen. Like, we can't set our intentions so strictly. I feel like it's like you have to be fluid with the vision.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's beautiful. I'm excited to see what you guys do next on your next property in Mexico.
Thank you. Us too.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have another question for you guys. So you guys are intentional about the guests that you host at the swim club. How do you pursue those guests? Is it like on the Airbnb platform, or do you pursue them through your own community, or kind of how do you market it to get the guests that you're looking for?
Well, and Frank, maybe you want to share a bit about who that guest looks like, what the ideal guest looks like, and then I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that being entrepreneurs who like to travel, we kind of cater to ourselves a little bit, and all of the people who are like us. It's often people who are looking for some like freedom to go and be in a new place and feel settled there. They're not just going to get drunk for 5 days and then go home. They're probably going to settle in, maybe work on their business while they're away. Maybe they're there with family, maybe it's with some colleagues, but it's definitely not it's not the party vibe, which is perhaps unique in Tulum compared to some other places. But no, we sort of sussed out this idea of who is the swim club guest, who is the Osira guest, and it's sort of I don't know, I feel like we are the avatar in a lot of ways for it.
Yeah, and I think it's the idea of people that just want to feel like they have an understanding, they feel like they can kind of integrate with the culture really easily and the surroundings really easily. So not just to come to the space and sort of either you stay in the space the whole time and never leave, or you're never in the space and you're gone the whole time. It's like finding that middle ground where you're staying in the space because you want to cook a meal or two, but you also want to know where all the cool restaurants are. So we make sure that they have access to that. And so it's sort of this kind of, full circle experience that we create for people, which is, like Frank said, what we would want and expect when we travel. But Osierra, so the kind of umbrella brand that we continue to reference, that we have a large community of entrepreneurs, and they have followed us through for the whole, several years, growing with us, being inspired by our own story. And they sort of saw us launch the swim club. So many of the people who are interested in the swim club and who support that community are people who were already sort of a part of our community from that agency perspective, back in the day. But even through the launch of it, we promoted it heavily on our own social media. We hosted a giveaway to like bring a guest down. We have, been in conversations with influencers who we either have had relationships with before or who have reached out to us. We are pursuing brand partnerships and like product partnerships to stock the swim club. We've done photography collaborations. So for us, it's like, again, like leveraging that community piece. Like, who do we already know? Who can we collaborate with? Who can we bring in and create within this space that we now have? So those are some conversations that we've had. Those are some ways that we've sort of gotten that exposure, which has been really helpful. And so we also have been, pretty intentional with the branding and marketing of the swim club itself. So it has like its own designated website. It has its own designated Instagram account. We promote it on our Pinterest. I've recently been doing like a TikTok series, which is all about how we moved down there. And so that's been something that's, important to us, but I think also because we follow a specific aesthetic with the space, our photography, our online presence, it all feels really cohesive. And it's very aligned with our own, of course, but at the same time, we also recognize that it's open to, so when Frank said it's like, oh, it's not for the party people, it's not because that's not our vibe. Like sometimes when we travel, that's what we want, but we also just know that our space is best used for a very specific kind of, very specific, I guess, like circumstance, right? And so it would be good for a family. We don't have a family, but we know the space could be good for that. So we remain open to, kind of different people and kind of different walks of life, but it's that creative spirit and being able to use the space in a creative way and feel like you're being kind of inspired while you're there. That's really important to us. And so we make sure that even on our Airbnb listing, that is articulated and that message gets put out there.
So on the direct or on the website that's created for Osierra Swim Club, is there a direct booking component to that where people who are in your community or like book directly through you and they get to cut out the Airbnb fees, or does it just have a link that goes to the Airbnb listing?
Currently, it's just going to Airbnb. We definitely are thinking about creating something more kind of specific and customized. And that's something that we want to kind of workshop on our own brand and then bring it to other people who are in that same space to be able to sort of bypass and figure that out. But right now it's just going to Airbnb. I mean, you can email us, of course, if you want to chat, like that's always an option, but Airbnb has been it since for now.
So is there a way that you can like track right now where people are coming from so you can really see the conversion of your community versus just like Airbnb marketing in general?
Oh, I'm sure, but
probably.
I don't think we've done that. We also have an email marketing component, which I did mention as well. But I mean, I think like, at the end of the day, we can always tell when someone books that, like with us, and we know their name. Like we know that they knew us prior. It wasn't just like, oh, they stumbled upon us. And I would say it's probably 50-50.
Yeah.
Like probably half of the people that book are people that already had an existing relationship with us, and half they find us and they've never heard of us. And then we build a relationship with them after, which is kind of cool because we do have that like continued experience where they can stay at Swim Club, but they can also follow us on social. They can also tag us. We can, chat on social and in the DMs and all that stuff. So we kind of get to have that full circle experience.
That's crazy. 50% is a ton. Like
it's wild.
That's huge. I mean, even with our, social following that we have, like we don't really push our own properties a whole lot. But it's just, I mean, we're new to the social game. We're new to the communication game within social media. We're being intentional about it. So it's one of those things that we haven't tapped into a whole lot yet, but we're exploring it. So that's why I'm picking so hard on that specific topic. Cause I'm like, how much power is there? Like how committed are people to staying in your space, and are they going to the location that you have a property in, and so on and so forth. So that's super encouraging. I want to figure out how to track it now.
Yeah, you totally can. Like it's you definitely can track it. We just haven't been. But I mean, we can track it just by looking at who our guests have been. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like views and stuff, like how many people have looked at the listing, that's a good question. But we would be able to take a peek at like how many people are looking at our website versus how many people are looking at the Airbnb listing and that kind of thing. So we can do that measure anytime and let you know.
Yeah. And then vice versa. Like, what does it look like to carry a guest who is new to Osierra, who's coming through Airbnb, who's not a pre-existing relationship that you have? What does it look like within your space or in your communication where you get them integrated into your community permanently after that?
I would say like the main thing is like when people like already know us, we definitely get way more engagement in the space. Like they take way more photos, they take way more videos, they're constantly tagging us because they already know that we have that presence. Whereas on the other hand, when people check in that are just kind of like random, like from another source, I would say not often do they post on social. Like it happens not super frequently, despite us displaying, you know, very clearly that we have an Instagram and that kind of thing. And I think it just might depend on the type of people as well. Like we have had a few guests who are a bit of an older demographic, and so I think it's just not second nature in that same way. But I do think even now that you said that, I'm like, we should be DMing them the account. Like we could be a lot more kind of like front forward about that. But I do find it's like the people who fit that exact avatar always pick up right away, and they're the people who we end up having the relationship with. So at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. So it doesn't have to be every single person, as long as it's the right person, right?
Yep, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah,
I'm feeling inspired.
It's nice you've been really intentional with your branding and experience too, because I feel like the further I at least get into the Airbnb space, the hosts that are intentional about that, instead of, sure, the cash flow is great, and that's why a lot of people start Airbnb. So like, but you can tell the difference between the people that are just in it for cash flow and then the people that are actually trying to create an experience. And I feel like those hosts are a lot more successful because they're putting their guest experience first and catering to a very specific person. So yeah, it's very clear that you guys have done that, and obviously it shows. So
it carries.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we're struggling, well, not really struggling, but are starting to have big conversations about internally with Superhost Labs and with our own properties, is like, you know, when you have a boutique style Airbnb and you've got one of them and it's yours, you get very emotionally attached to it, and it's one of those things that it's fun to create the experience that people, and you can like build on it for years and years and continue to improve it. But when you're doing it at scale, right, when you're doing 30 properties a year, you don't want to lose that personal experience, because that's what people love about Airbnb. And so, you know, if you want your property to have longevity and not just be this like fun new thing for 2 years and all of a sudden it really drops in occupancy, how do you continue carrying that through at scale with 1 million properties in 1 million different markets with 1 million different avatars? And so it becomes much more difficult, but still it's like there's got to be a way, right? And it's so important to like carry that communication with every property that you've got.
Absolutely. And I mean, from a marketing perspective, like if we were to be, you know, involved in that conversation, like we would look at what's the closest comp to that. It's not another boutique Airbnb, it's a hotel chain, right? So how are they doing it? And that's what you want to start looking at, right? And you want to make sure that you're hiring people that kind of align with that persona, because someone's going to have to manage it on the ground, and you have to find people who have that same level of investment that can kind of carry it through and build those relationships on your behalf. So there's a hot tip for you.
There's one.
Yes.
We'll be clipping that portion and sending it to Slack. Thank you.
This is a working session, if you didn't know. Okay, I've got another question for you guys. You two are obviously passionate communicators, which I think that was like the most unique, like it's so obvious now that I've stalked you guys so in depth and I'm like so invested in what you guys have going on. But it's just unique in that way that you put that first, right? And we see people do Airbnb and these investment properties just backwards and not putting that first. When it comes to your branding on the SEO side of your listing specifically, how intentional were you guys with that? And how do you think it converted with your overall listing? Because it's so hard for us to gauge on whether our SEO is successful, not successful, talking to the right person, not talking to the right person. What did that look like for you guys?
Oh my God, it was, yes, like it was so intentional in how we did all of it. I feel like one of the first questions we ask if we're working on like client work, creative work, anything is like, okay, what's the story? And it's always coming back to like, what is the story that people are going to care about here? So when we're writing the listing, it's the exact same thing. Like we want to build this whole experience through the words in like the listing words that we use, in like the welcome guide, in everything, because we want people to feel so immersed in what we're doing. It's not just about, okay, how can we get people through and just make some money? It's like, let's actually craft an experience that people are going to go home and talk about after and like tell people about. So it starts with like coming through, like the words that we use are so specifically chosen. We don't just like have little throwaway words like people would have in just listing amenities. Like we try to be very particular about how we're describing them and sort of crafting this little scene for them. So I don't know, it's a lot of fun. Like I remember writing that listing and just having like the best time trying to find the right words to capture like the spirit of the place.
And I think like, even to your point, Sarah, like it's like how is it converting versus, to me it's like it's who is it attracting? Like that's the more important question, because someone can land on our space and take a peek and think, oh, this looks nice. But if they don't stop to read the description and then have that be the thing that kind of hooks them, then like they're not going to necessarily be the exact person that we're looking for. Of course, we're still going to attract people like that, and that's totally fine, because like you know, there's the keywords, there's the things people are looking for. But for us, it's like, I would say very frequently we have people message us that specifically say like, I love the care that you've put into this description, or I love the way that you've put this together. So it's like when we're receiving compliments on it, I think it's doing a good job.
Yeah, 1000%. 1000%. And I feel like a lot of times people drop the ball both on the photography and the listing side because it's the last thing that you do. And by the time you get there, you're like broke, exhausted, beaten up. Like, and so at the end, you're like, just like, let me get across the finish line. Like, let me army crawl across. But at the end of the day, I mean, that is like your first initial experience, right? It's your first impression. And so to not be intentional about that just seems like a waste of the entire thing. So we'll have to link your listing on this YouTube episode so people can like look at it, walk around, see what you guys are doing. It'll help boost you on the Airbnb thing.
I love that. I appreciate that. But I will note though, we have our we did our photography the first time, and this I think is an important note for anyone that's like in the creative space. Like we were kind of pressed for time when we were first listing it in the beginning. We did our photography the first time, and now that we've kind of gone back and been in the space for a while, I'm like, no, I want to hire somebody to come in and take photos that doesn't have the personal attachment, because I think that like it just. I think that there's like something to be said about kind of pursuing like the person who's like the best at that craft. And it's like, yes, we're photographers, we're content photographers. So we have created beautiful content for social media and all these really like lovely close-up scenes, but that doesn't necessarily display the property in the best way. So that's like a bit of a learning thing for us, that now this kind of next up, like this current summer that we're in, we're pursuing getting it photographed professionally, which I think will even make even more of a difference. So there's always like room for learning and improvement, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more on the photography standpoint. I mean, we went through the phase of shooting with our iPhones and like trying to, you know, be familiar with content, be familiar with Instagram pictures, and then try and like translate that in real estate photography. And it just, they have a whole set of equipment. They've got a whole process. It's just
exactly, it's totally different.
It's totally different. And specifically, like for me, when I'm looking at the photography, the photographers that are great at it will take like the 3 exposure photos where they'll like capture the inside really beautifully, and then they'll like actually, you'll get to see out the window and you get to see the trees instead of like having it overexposed. And it's like little details like that I'm like, can't do it unless I'm a professional and unless I have all that equipment. So it does make a big difference.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally.
Definitely. Okay, well, we try to be as transparent as possible about numbers going into Airbnb listings, specifically because how much you put into it puts you at like a different caliber of Airbnb in reality. Nobody likes to put a bunch of money into something up front, but it really does pay off in the end. And one thing that you pointed out specifically is that you had to put all of your money up front buying that property in Mexico, which is a huge tip for people who want to buy down there. But when it came to the upfront costs of furnishing that after and the cost of the house, how much did you end up having to put into that?
We were under 200,000 for sure, like all in. We paid 153 for the property itself. And when I say like you have to pay cash for the property itself, you do. Like you can't get a mortgage in Mexico on that property, but you can get a mortgage on, say, a home that you have in the States or in Canada and use that leverage to purchase it, which is what we did. So we had our lump sum that we were able to put down by paying a mortgage in Canada, which is how a lot of people finance like a purchase in Mexico. On top of the 153, it's about 7 to 8% closing costs in Mexico. A lot of their system runs through, like, it's a bigger legal portion than you find in the States or in Canada. So there's more legal fees, lawyers' fees. And then it was the renos. And when we bought this place, it was orange. And that's like the best description that I have is it was just floor to ceiling orange. And you see the listings and you think, oh, okay, we can paint that. That's no problem. And then when you get down there, you realize that a home that's kind of been like, they just locked the door and walked away for about 3 years and just left it sitting in the humidity. And all of that wood that looks totally fine in a listing is significantly less fine.
And we bought it without ever seeing it in person. That's it. Oh no, you did see it.
I did see it.
Yeah. Very good. I didn't see it. So yeah, but even still, a walkthrough didn't reveal what was happening.
And like I went through like with a contractor, he gave me the list of everything, and I was like, okay, this sounds good. And then it was like, I remember like within a week of us moving in, it was like, oh, none of this stuff is actually okay.
Yeah.
So we did sort of like an initial reno. We had to replace all of the air conditioning. We had to do some plumbing work, like stuff just to be able for us to live there. And that was about 5,000 on the first reno. The benefit that you have in Mexico is labor is very cheap. So it sort of helps to bring some of the renovation costs down on that side, which was helpful. And then we did a second remodel. We completely redid the kitchen. We got rid of all of the wood that was in there, redid 2.5 bathrooms. And that was about 4,000 for materials and labor.
Yeah, so around 200 US, like
and
for everything. And there's still work that we want to do to it. And, you know, obviously then we also have to furnish it and all that stuff, which we don't have an exact number for. But, and I would also say like even that price that we paid for the property, like Tulum itself is quite an expensive market. Like it's quite high price for Mexico in general. So there's a lot of opportunities that are much less than that. Like we know people who have purchased like a condo for like 60 grand maybe, and it's like ready to go, like in another area though, like just in a different city, right? So it does definitely depend where you look, and lots of these things are variables, but that was our experience.
Well, I have a quick question because I don't know how this is outside of the US at all. What is there like an inspection process when you're buying a home there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is like in Mexico, you can work with a realtor. Realtors are not really licensed in the same way. There is no structure. I can go down and call myself a realtor tomorrow if I happen to know some people who are selling a property. There's no inspections. There's no anything. It's just sort of like buyer beware. You have to really take care of yourself in the process because there's no system there that will take care of you for you.
And I think in knowing people that can support as well. Like we had someone, like a friend of ours had moved down and had a house built there. So we asked like their builder to come take a look. And so people who kind of know the trades and understand how it works in that market, you have to have somebody on your side. Otherwise, there's no way that you aren't going to end up kind of in a place that's not ideal.
Yeah. So with your existing property, I mean, I know that they don't have the same type of mortgages or loans that they have in the US, but are you able to leverage the cash that you've put in your property currently for another one, or is it a whole nother process where it's starting from ground zero and you have to have the cash to go in and do it from the ground up?
Yeah, it's that one. The whole system of borrowing in Mexico is it's very new. People typically don't carry debt. Credit cards are a very new sort of introduction there. It's just it's an embedded concept of you have the money for it, you pay cash for it, and that's it. So there is no like leveraging an asset. There is no making payments on a car until very recently in the country.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because like we've totally had these conversations with people where like it just depends what kind of investment you're like looking for, right? Like, and I think for us, we knew that it was something that was going to bring us joy, bring us revenue now, and something we could eventually sell if we wanted to after putting money into it. And being able to create a space like that from the ground up, like we wouldn't have had that opportunity in Canada, and nor would we have wanted it, like right. So for us it felt like kind of the right choice, but yeah, I can definitely see why it's totally different. It's a totally different like strategy almost, right?
Yeah, 100%. Which I think, I mean, I've seen Airbnb hosts do this in Bali as well, where it seems like it's about the same structure. You have to pay cash for it. Labor is super inexpensive. So you can build this like immaculate house for the down payment of an immaculate house in the US, right? So it like kind of makes sense in that way. It's just a whole different ballgame. So it's like to hear that you can't leverage another property. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine having to save up another $200,000 before I like got another property.
Yeah,
Don't-
and for sure. And I mean, even when you talk about like expansion and like next steps, like it definitely does feel like it could potentially be a much more accessible option for us to pursue, you know, the States or Canada or, you know, somewhere where that mortgage opportunity is. And like we said, maybe that opportunity will come up. But now that we know how everything kind of works in Mexico, to be able to explore that more feels good at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, and it's paid for, right? So after you pay for it, it's 100%.
Right.
Yeah, like you're like, I'm just raking in cash. I'm like, I'm looking at a 30-year mortgage, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm making everything on top of that. So we're just doing a little backwards, but no, it makes a lot of sense. Your profits are probably way higher than ours. Well, that's incredible, guys. Okay, so I've got one more question for you as we wrap up. What is your, and you can answer this individually as well, what is your least favorite part about Airbnb?
You can go first.
Okay. I think for me, my least favorite part is that like the anxiety for a new guest and being like, I hope they love it. Like, I really hope that they like staying here. Because it's like, this was our home for so long. Like we outfitted it to be our home. It's such a representation of us. And it's like, we put something out into the world to share with people. And it's like, come on, you like it as much as we do, right? That's, I think like the worst part for me is just not knowing. And like some people don't leave reviews. You never really find out if they liked it or not. And I'm like, come on, you must have loved it. I love it. And that's kind of it.
Yeah, for sure. But all our reviews have been awesome.
Yes.
We're almost superhost status.
Almost.
But yeah, I mean, and people do love it, and it's like the anxiety is always kind of negated when you see people actually using the space in a way that it's intended to be used. You're like, oh, they did that. They used the pot. They figured out where the pans are. It's an open concept. But you know, it's fun to see that, and I think like on the other hand, like Frank mentioned, like we set it up to be our home, and we actually lived there for such a long time that like pretty much like, so when we bought it in 2020, between then and now, we've probably lived there for like close to 12 months in total. Because usually when we go back, it's for like a chunk, so we can like do work on the place and that kind of stuff. So from that perspective, like we always settle in. And at this point right now, we don't have another home. Like we don't have a rental that we stay in regularly. We just either we're there or we're traveling. So that's our kind of only grounding space. And I think for us, it's that having to say goodbye to it and knowing that like we're sharing it with other people. It's like the sharing is the positive part, and we're excited about that. But the leaving, it still feels like a little like, okay, like see you soon, you know, and like kind of wishing that we were able to enjoy it. But at the end of the day, it fuels the life that we want to live. And I think as well, like we are now in pursuit of a property that we can live at full time. Or like full time as much as we would, just so we have somewhere to like put all of our stuff, you know, and like feel a bit more grounded. So I think once we have that, we won't feel that way anymore. We'll just be able to fully enjoy it and embrace it for, you know, a getaway for us and a getaway for everyone who we share it with. But that's definitely been kind of one of those things that felt harder than I thought it would, I guess.
Oh, that resonates so hard. We're in the same exact phase, right? Where we like lived in the property for so many months. We're like very emotionally attached to it. I told myself I wasn't going to do that, and I'm just like eating my words. I know. It's like a reflection of us, you know, it's like everything screams us. And so like yesterday, Ethan was running Medicare appointments like up near our property, which is an hour from here. And I see him like online. He's like across the lake at the public access. He's like zooming in on our house as we have guests. And I'm like, I feel that like, I just want to be there. I want to be there. I want to enjoy my property, and you have to share the space, right? That's what it's for. So there's definitely some struggle that comes with that. So guests, if you're listening to this, just know that the property you're staying in is probably someone's emotional attachment. You have no idea.
Exactly. It's like so loved, and it's like, especially I think the first one, you know, like and maybe not, but as you continue to grow, like I think you kind of will love them all in their own way. But I feel like for us, for this especially, because it was like such a big turning point in our life, that it holds like a lot of meaning to us. And it's like, yeah, it's our swim club. It is. But it's also your swim club. You know, it's also everybody else's swim club, and we just have to get used to it. So it is what it is.
I feel that. Well, this has been an episode full of tips and tricks. I'm sure that our listeners have enjoyed it. I know I have enjoyed consuming your content over the last month of meeting you guys. It's been incredibly helpful and incredibly welcoming. So thank you guys for that. Emily, well, actually, why don't you guys plug all of your stuff first and tell our listeners where they can find you?
Of course. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having us. This was great. It's so much fun to be able to chat about this. And just so everyone who's listening knows, if you ever have any questions for us, like we are so open to discussion. We love having these conversations. So you can find us at Osierra Creative on Instagram. That's sort of our main platform. And then our swim club platform for the Tulum property specifically is at Osierra Swim Club. We also have a community for, as we mentioned before, remote living, entrepreneurship, all that, which is at the Table by Osierra on Instagram. And then we also have a website, osierra.ca, and that houses everything. And then if you follow me personally, Xanthi Appleyard on TikTok, I've shared a ton of insight on moving to Mexico, broke down a lot of the numbers that we had this conversation with even more too. So if you're interested in some of that stuff, you can find that there. I think that's everything. I mean, of course, you can look up Swim Club in Tulum on Airbnb if you want to check out the listing. And yeah, other than that, but please do reach out anytime. We really love to have conversations. It's something that just makes it really fun for us. So
yes, and if you are a remote entrepreneur, join the table. And we will be plugging all of that underneath of the video as well on YouTube, so that if you are listening through YouTube, just click below and you'll be able to find all of the links. Emily, did you want to plug all of our stuff as well?
Yes, you can find Sarah and I at the Carwells on every platform. And then Superhost Labs is at superhostlabs.com or at Superhost Labs on all the platforms.
Beautiful. Thanks, Emily. Well, thank you guys again so much for coming on. This has been amazing. And we will see you in a week.
yeah,
Yay!
so excited.
All right. And bye to our listeners. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.